My name is Mary Lou Oppie Cunningham. I was born in Sterling, Colorado. And my mother had two midwives to help her with the birth. And I am named after both of those ladies, Mary and Lou. My dad was born in, oh dear, I'm almost forgotten, Nebraska, I think. And I'm sorry, I think my mother was born in Kansas, but I'd have to look it up. My mom and dad had 10 children before I was born. One of them died as a baby when it was only 10 minutes old. And I didn't know I even had that other sibling until 2 or 3 years ago. There were 4 boys and 6 girls. I grew up mostly with my nieces and nephews because I had married siblings when I was little, and they were having children when my mom was still having children. So rather than growing up with cousins, I grew up with nieces and nephews because that's who we lived closest to. I had one sister. Her name was Minnie. Her name was Minnie, named after my maternal grandmother. She was crippled most of her life, and she only went to school one day in her life because when she was old enough to go to school, the children made fun of her because she couldn't walk well, and she ended up being crippled. She had what we called infantile paralysis at the time, is now known as polio, and there was no vaccine back in the 1940s. Well, I guess earlier than that. Maybe it was in the 1930s. Let's back up. Anyway, she died at the age of 19 from pneumonia, not from her paralysis. And I remember my dad he lifted me up so I could see in her casket. I'm sorry. And my dad was basically a barber. He took his barber's exam in 1914 and barbered most of his life, except he was also a farmer. And he and his brothers dry farmed in Colorado. When we call it dry farming, is because there wasn't irrigation at that time. So you depended on the weather, and things didn't work out in that area, but of course he could fall back on his barbering experience and get a job. So yeah, and my mother, she was a homemaker. When you have that many children, you're a homemaker. And she didn't even have a wash machine until after her 9th child was born. And that child, the last one born before me, was born in the hospital, but all the rest were born at home. So anyway, that's, and Mom made most of our clothes, and she did lots of quilting. And it wasn't just tying quilts like they do a lot of nowadays. It was actual quilting, and made quiltings for many of her grandchildren, probably a lot of them. And it was hard times. They lived through the Depression. They lived through World War II. But then I'm jumping ahead because I was born before World War II started. Mom used to help her mom fix meals to take to the men out in the field who were farming. And she would drive a team of mules out to the field. My dad loved to fish, as my son and grandson do. And he could sit by, we didn't have, we lived where there was reservoirs to fish from, but not necessarily rivers. So he would sit by those reservoirs by hours and be a very patient fisherman. I remember him just sitting by the bank on whatever he had available, a rock, a box, and fishing, yeah. Moving on in my childhood, we moved. One thing we did do is we moved a lot. Like I say, we lived in a lot of little towns in Colorado, some in Nebraska, not as many. So I didn't go to the same school very often. The most I went to the schools, the longest was when I was in high school. No, I went to the same high school, which was in Fort Collins, Colorado. Okay. And when I was in high school, one place we lived in Fort Collins was an apartment above a company that sold glass, like window glass, stuff like that, yeah. And my dad worked in one of the big hotels there, which probably now looks like a very small hotel. He was a barber in the hotel. When we went to church, well, not just when I was a teenager, but all my life, when we went to church, we went to the Salvation Army. And some people, they don't realize it's not just a charitable organization, but it's a church. We had Sunday services, we had Sunday school, we had young people's programs, and they had a program for the ladies as well, which they called the Home League. I didn't have hardly any friends in school, in high school. I had like 0 friends at school, but I had my friends at the Salvation Army. And and that's okay. I didn't care. We were always very poor, mostly poor. We're gonna go back like to World War II. That was one of our most prosperous times because everybody had a job in World War II. They had to have a job because they took all the men to fight in the war. My oldest brother, he was already married with children, and they drafted him into the army. He fought in Europe. And my youngest brother, he was still single, but he enlisted in the Marine Corps, and he fought in the South Pacific. But we were lucky. They both came home. Anyway, during my teenage years and going to the Salvation Army, I did have a couple special friends. One was a little Spanish girl, and she was a year younger than me, and then another friend as well. And their brothers, they each had a brother. So we all just kind of hung out together, so to speak. And when I was 15 and 16 and 17, I worked at the Salvation Army camp in Colorado. And they had camps for different age groups, boys, girls, underprivileged children, the women, and whatever. And it's down close to Colorado Springs. And I worked there for 3 summers, and guess how much money I made? $10 a week. And I was very happy with that. I made $10 a week and saved my money so I could have school clothes and whatever I needed for school. And we had fun. I didn't just work. I waited tables and cleaned cabins, but in our spare time, we got to watch movies, go hiking, ride horses. We had a swimming pool. Even though I don't swim, we had a swimming pool. and it was great. It was good life. And so I enjoyed doing that. To give you some comparison to the meager amount of money I made, according to today's standards, my dad only made between $40 and $50 a week. So, yeah. Which now you probably get paid an hour. but those were fun times. I enjoyed them very much. And of course, there was always, going back a little bit when I was a little younger, not a teenager yet, we would always go to my, not always, but a lot of the time when we lived close enough, we would go to my oldest sister's home for dinner because she was married with children of her own, and we got to play with her children, my nieces and nephews, as I said before, that we played with. And my oldest sister, you could always know what you're going to have for Sunday dinner. Fried chicken with the chicken they actually killed and then prepared it for dinner because they had chickens, and of course potatoes and gravy, always iced tea, and a cream pie, usually banana cream pie. So you always really know if you're going to Margaret's for Sunday dinner what you were going to eat. And so that was fun. Like I said, when my dad wasn't barbering, he was a farmer. Well, we were on a farm just out of Amherst, Colorado. I know you guys can look up where all these places are if you want. He wasn't farming for himself. He was a hired hand, but we had a house that they let their help live in, and we had a house and everything. And one day Dad was out in the field, and we saw a tornado coming. So very lucky for us, it never touched down, but when it was coming at you, you didn't know it wasn't going to. And so they used to have cellars that were actually dug in the ground, covered with dirt. They were just like a hump. You couldn't really tell they were there unless you were looking for them. And they had a wooden door you'd open up and go down into, where people stored their potatoes and canned fruit or whatever they had for the winter. And so Mom took us girls and we went down in the cellar. But everything turned out well. It didn't touch down and hit us. So there were some, a few scary times. And I was only about, I was about in the 6th grade then, whatever age that is. 11 maybe, I don't know, 10, 11. I was just out of high school, just graduated. I was 18 years old. And I've talked about the Salvation Army. Well, the captain and his wife, who were over the Fort Collins Salvation Army, were transferred to Ogden, Utah. And they had 2 small children, so they asked me to come and live with them and help with their children. That lasted a few months, and I had a falling out with them. So I left. But I didn't go far. I just found first I stayed with a friend I knew from the church, and until I found a place of my own, and then I rented me a room in a home. And I've been in Utah ever since. I got me a job as a secretary at the Red Devil Coal Company office, which it's no longer there. It was on Washington Boulevard in Ogden. And started to go up to Weber State. It only had like 4 buildings at the time, and it was a 2-year school. But then I found I couldn't afford to go to school and work at the same time. I didn't make enough money, and I don't know if I was stupid enough or they didn't have them, but I didn't know or couldn't go to ask for financial help. I don't know if they didn't have it or I just didn't know about it. But so anyway, I quit school and finally got a job at it's called the Utah General Depot out on 12th Street. It was an Army supply depot is what it was. And yeah. But I never left Utah. I never went back home other than to visit, of course. Yeah, I left home at 18 and never looked back. Well, like I said, I went temporarily up to Weber State, okay? And I met a little Spanish girl. I like Spanish girls. They're good. I had one at home in Colorado, and now Anyway, she had been to a dance and met 2 nice men, and she says, come and go with me. And so I reluctantly agreed. So anyway, this friend that I'd met at Weber State invited me to go to a dance with her where she had met 2 guys, okay? And this place was called the Bertha Anna. It was on 24th Street in Ogden. It was upstairs, and it was a dance hall / roller skating rink, which I know it's still there. I don't know what they use it for now. Okay. Anyway, we went to the dance and we met the 2 fellows, and I really liked one of them, and she liked the other one, but the other guy didn't really like her. But the man I liked, we started dating. And about a year and a half later, we become husband and wife. We met in March. I remember it was March because my birthday was in February, and March is the next month. So anyway, we met in March, and then in May, which is like 2.5 months later, approximately, I went home to visit my mom and dad. And the man I had been dating when I lived at home, when he came home from leave from the Navy, I would date him, okay? Well, he asked me to marry him and gave me an engagement ring. I took it and said, I'll let you know. I came back to Utah and told this other man, Kyle, that I had been proposed to, and he said, will you marry me? And I said, yes. So I sent the ring back, needless to say. Sorry, I don't know whatever happened to him. I'm sure he got married and had a beautiful family. Then, that was in May. We went shopping for rings, and then we continued to date for another year and like 3 or 4 months before we actually got married. These are some of my wedding pictures. These pictures and the wedding took place at what was called the Mansion House on Adams Avenue in Ogden, Utah. And the only ones that were at my wedding from my side of the family were my mom and dad and brother Leroy and my sister and her husband and their little boy. And that was all the ones from my side of the family that came to the wedding because they were the only ones available. It's a long ways. Anyway, we got married, and we had a little 2-room apartment, which we only lived in a couple months because I don't know, we didn't like it. So we found another one, had 3 rooms. We had found another apartment that had 3 rooms, and so we went out to furnish that little place, and we bought. Well, first of all, Kyle's mother gave us a kitchen table and chairs and a bedroom set that were used, that had been hers. And then we went out and bought a living room set, which was a couch and a coffee table and 2 end tables and a nice big TV. But of course they were in boxes. I mean, you know, they weren't flat screen. They were huge in size, not necessarily in picture. They were huge. And we lived there for a while, and we got a little puppy, and his name was Gus. And he was like a cocker terrier, I don't know what. He was just a little nut, but he was cute. Then we moved into a house up on Monroe. We had a whole house, but it was still only 3 rooms. But it was a house. We had a yard and a garage, and I could do the washing on the back porch, and with a Ringer wash machine. You had to, you know, wring the clothes into the rinse water and whatever, just like my mom used to do. And we were only married 2 years, and we bought our home in Roy. And we were there, well, the home's still there. We raised our 3 children. But before we started having a family, we used to do a lot of fun things. My husband was a good dancer, and we loved to go to dances. Even when we were dating, we loved to go to dances. They had dances at Lagoon, and some of the big bands, what they called the big bands back then, came. Louis Armstrong, we saw Louis Armstrong. Or we went to Salt Lake and saw Johnny Mathis and things like that. We loved to dance. And then, like I said, my husband was a fisherman. He liked to go fishing. We went to Yellowstone every year. Every single year we went to Yellowstone because he was from Ashton, Idaho, which is very, very close to Yellowstone. Freeway now bypasses Ashton, but didn't back then. He grew up in Ashton, Idaho. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. His dad died when he was around 14. And so it was just him and his mom and brother and sister. And this would have been child labor, but he worked in a filling station when he was like 14. And he secretly bought a motorcycle for himself without telling his mom. And it turned out he loved to ride on the motorcycle. When we were married, he always had 2 motorcycles. He had the last 2 I remember were, he had a 360 Yamaha dirt bike with a Kickstarter. He had a Honda CC road bike, which I loved to ride on the back of with him, and one of the things I really, really missed. On the motorcycle, I remember him telling my 2 young sons when they were still children, when you can start that bike, you can ride it. And he had previously once, when he kick-started it, the kick part chewed up the back of his calf on his leg, so he knew it was not easy to start. That's why he told him that, but it happened sooner than we thought it would. Those boys were, determined. And they started the bike, and Oh, my husband, he when he was in high school, he played football and he boxed. This is his boxing team. When he was 16, he belonged to a National Guard unit, and the unit was called up to go to Korea during the Korean War. And so he didn't have to go because of his age, but he says he went and turned 17 before they shipped him to Korea. So he served a couple years in Korea, and he said he was sick all the way over on the ship and begged to be flown home when it was time to come home. And they said no when he was sick all the way home. But I met him after his stint in Korea. I met him after that. Yeah, he was living in Ogden with friends from Ashton, Idaho, because they had come down from Ashton because there was no work there. If he wasn't a farmer or a business owner, there was no work to be had. So they came back down and went to work at Hill Air Force Base. So, yeah. So anyway, that was I'm sure his mom was not happy. We also, we were both working. We had no kids. We had no responsibilities. We had bought a home, so we went out and bought a boat. And we loved to go boating. We went almost every single weekend up on Pine View Dam. We went boating and water skiing. And Kyle was a really good water skier in my sight. He could ski backwards and one ski and things like that. Well, I learned to water ski even though I can't swim. So I learned to water ski. As long as I had my life jacket and didn't sink, I was happy. But it was fun. We had a lot of fun. Kyle, even one year, he used his boat to pull in the 24th of July parade with all the beautiful girls in their bathing suits. I don't know where he got the girls, but okay. So he would do that, and so we had a lot of fun, and then we started our family, and not that we still didn't have fun, but we didn't go boating every weekend, and we didn't go dancing every Saturday night and things like that. Yeah, and Kyle was a heavy equipment mechanic at Hill Air Force Base when we got married. And he worked there as long as I know. Once he took a part-time job at the High Hat, which is in Sunset or Clearfield, I can't remember. Yeah, he worked there part-time as well as his full-time job, just to, supplement. But that was before we got married, just to supplement his money. But it was a lot of fun being young. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we had a good time. Okay, well, of course, I got pregnant, and I was still working at the Utah General Depot at the time. And it came time to have the baby. I started having labor pains, and so it was Kyle's bowling night. We also bowled. I bowled too, but not while I was pregnant. I bowled on a team at the depot. So we had a lot of activities, but it was his bowling night, and I was having labor pains, so I decided I'd go with him to the bowling alley. Okay, so I don't know why his sister was there, but his sister was there and she went with us. Her name's Effie. And so she went to the bowling alley with us, and she timed my labor pains for me. This is the paper she timed my labor pains on. So she would, don't ask me to read it, I can't make out all her hieroglyphics, but she timed my labor pains, how frequent, how long they lasted, etc. So anyway, she timed my labor pains, and we went home from the bowling alley. Bowling was over, we got home. It was around 11 o'clock in the evening, we called the doctor, and he says, it's okay. She probably won't have the baby till morning, but you can go to the hospital if you want to. So we went to the hospital, and my baby was born at 3:10 a.m. Early morning. I don't think he meant that, or I don't think the doctor meant that early. And he was 5 pounds, 15 and a half ounces. And Kyle thought something was wrong with him because he was so white. Babies are supposed to have a ruddy complexion, but he was so white, but nothing was wrong. And then 19 months later, I had number 2. Another boy. Well, the first one we named Kevin, and then we had another boy. With Kevin, we named him actually Kevin Lee. I wanted to name him Leland after Kyle's dad, but Kyle said no. So we shortened it to Lee rather than Leland. Okay, now moving on to boy number 2, 19 months later. I was home because I wasn't working. Well, I worked for a while. I worked as a key punch operator between Kevin and Rick's birth. Okay, I worked as a key punch operator for IRS, but that was just for a few months. And then, so when Kyle was working swing shift, and he come home from work, and we went to bed, and my water broke, drowned the bed. And so it was the middle of the night, and we had to leave Kevin with Kyle's mother, and we didn't want to wake her up that early, so we waited till morning before we went and woke her up and said, will you take care of Kevin for us while we go to the hospital? And we went to the hospital, and I had the baby at 9 something that morning. We only went there about 7 o'clock in the morning, so it was only a couple hours after we had been in the hospital. And back then, the husbands were not allowed in the delivery room, so there was a little man waiting in the delivery room, and was really, really mad because he had been there hours and hours and hours, and we had only been there a couple hours and had our baby. So then between those 2 children, between Rick, we named him Ricky. We wanted to name him Richard, but my dad's name was Richard, but my sister had someone named Richard, and my brother named one of his kids Richard, and we thought we better just do something else, so we said Ricky instead of Richard. And anyway, and I went back to work, and the next time I went to work at Hill Air Force Base. And they weren't going to let me work there because I was pregnant. But luckily, they said that's discrimination, and so I got the job and worked for a few months. And then my baby daughter was born in June. Well, Rick had been born in September. She was born in June, so that was 20 months later. So they were all fairly close together. And I went to the doctor, and he said, you're ready to have the baby. Do you need to go home for anything? And I says, well, guess not. He said, well, drive to the hospital. I'll meet you there. So I did. I walked in the front door and said, I'm here to have a baby. And that was around noon. Okay, that was around noon during the day. So they prepped me. They put an IV in my arm, and the doctor comes in and says, I'm going home for lunch. And he says, I live close by. So he was only gone 20, 30 minutes tops, and he came back and he says, you're not dilating fast enough. And he reached up and turned the IV up. He says, I have a 2 o'clock meeting. Like I say, I'd only walked in the door at noon, so, this was not too good. I had the baby at 1:45, and he was on the elevator to his 2 o'clock meeting at 2 o'clock. So I had fairly easy pregnancies with all of them, but yeah. And so we raised all 3 of our children there in the house in Roy that we had bought, and I still have. And yeah, so we're all from Roy, really, because I lived in Roy, in Utah, much longer than the 18 years before I moved here. Well, things slowed down, of course, a little bit, because you have 3 small ones. You can't, that's quite a handful. But I went back to work after each child when they were 1 year old, approximately. And so I worked all the time they were growing up. The things we did mostly were we'd go camping locally, close by. We went to Tony Grove and up to Beaver and places like that weren't that far to drive. We started out with a camper on the back of a pickup, and that worked for a while. But the children, they grow; they don't stay little. So then we graduated to a trailer house, and it wasn't real big. It was only like 17, 18 foot long, but it was bigger, and it could hold all 5 of us. So yeah, we graduated to a trailer house, and then eventually, when the kids were teenagers, I can't remember exactly when, we graduated to a motorhome, and which, was nice. It wasn't real fancy, but it was nice, and we graduated to that. But we used to go camping and a lot. We did take one trip with our trailer house. We went up through Idaho and Montana and into Canada, and we took the kids to the Calgary Stampede in Canada. And then we went across Canada to the West Coast, and then down through Washington and Oregon and into San Francisco. And they were having a heat wave in San Francisco at that time, and so we just kind of sat with our feet in the pool or whatever. But then we came across the desert in Nevada, and the air conditioning in our car wasn't working. So, but we made it home. A little hot, but we made it home okay. Like I say, and think back then, you're going 60 miles an hour, you get a little breeze even if it's hot through the windows. And then we also took our trailer once, and we went down to San Diego, and that was really fun. Went to the Wax Museum and the SeaWorld. We took the kids to Mexico, into Tijuana. Yeah, a little scary, a little sketchy. But we went to Tijuana, and we had a blast. And the kids, they bought leather vests and treasure chests, and Rick bought a skeleton head, not real, out of clay, of course, and we just had fun. It was lots of trinkets. The kids loved it. We bought them lots of trinkets and that, and of course we always took the kids. We took the kids to Colorado to visit. Just my mother and sisters and stuff like that, because my dad had passed away a year before Kevin was born. So, but we took him to Colorado a lot too, and did things with him. But, and then there's always the 100 million football games we went to. Kevin and Rick both played Little League football, and we went to every football game for both of them. And some they didn't even play in. So that was a lot of football. Plus, we watched a lot of football on TV, college and pro, and yeah, football was a big thing in our lives. So we did a lot of football watching and that. And Susan played softball, and her softball team, I don't know, they won. I don't know if it was just Utah or what, but they won one year. And so they got to ride in the 24th of July parade. And you'll never guess their name. It was the Brilliant Bananas. So, of course, there was her softball games. And then there was, we went to church basketball games that the boys played in, and Pinewood derbies. And yeah, we were real active with the kids. So, and then as they got older, we gave each one of them a choice of what instrument they wanted to play. Kevin chose the guitar, Rick chose the drums, and Susan the piano. So I doubt Susan can still play the piano very much. She does have her piano still, however. Rick doesn't have his drums anymore, but Kevin is still a fabulous guitar player. He started when he was 12, and I remember him, well, I went with him, of course, to his guitar lessons, but as he got older, like got a learner's permit for driving, I'd go with him, but he'd drive my little, they don't make them anymore, Vega hatchback made by Chevrolet, which, by the way, Kyle made the down payment for it with his pickup truck as a surprise for my birthday and gave me the Vega. So I don't remember which birthday, but anyway. Anyway, Kevin's a fabulous guitar player now. He still plays in the band sometimes, and yeah, loves music. And yeah, so. And then they just grew up. Susan got married. She met Mark at Classic Roller Rink, I believe it was. He was here working on a job for the diaper plant. I can't remember which one. Anyway, he's an electrician, so he was working on a diaper plant, and they met at the Classic Skating Rink and dated while he was here. And then of course, he had to move on. I mean, that job was finished, you know. And then so they sort of had a long-distance relationship. And then Rick went and joined Mark, and they were working in California together, or, you know, at the same job. And Mark came back and proposed to Susan. And so she said yes, and so he went back to work. His folks lived in Hurricane, Utah, over 300 miles from here. And so Susan and I planned the wedding by ourselves. Had them send measurements so we could order the tuxedos. They couldn't go in and get tuxedos or anything, because, yeah, so we had it in the steakhouse there in Roy, and yeah, her dad walked her down the aisle. One of the girls from one of the bands Kevin played with provided the music on the piano, and it was really nice, except we couldn't serve the ice cream because it was frozen too hard. So I sent her brothers out to buy something so we could serve to the guests. But other than that, it went well. Yeah. Well, and as far as my oldest son, before he was married, he he played with several bands. He played with a rock band called Battle Axe, and he and Rick both played in a country band, the Barnyard Boogie Band. Yeah, with the Ashby Brothers. And fact is, when they were in that country band, they played. I think they played at the Eagles and fraternity, which my husband was a member of, and we'd go and dance to their band, and it was great. And then, of course, he went on some USO tours overseas, and yeah, he'd have to elaborate on all those, but yeah, he turned out to be the musician anyway. Yeah, and then he met and married Sherry, who, of course, is your mom. And they called me. They had not really dated or anything, but had known who the other person was since grade school. So they called me like on a Thursday and said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "I don't have any plans." And they says, "We're getting married." So it was going to be at her sister's house, and we said, okay. I called Susan and told her Kevin was getting married, and her and Mark and the 3 children they had at the time came and barely made it to my house time to change clothes and get to the wedding. So, yeah, some exciting weddings. And then the next year, Rick married someone he had met in Salt Lake, I believe, and so they had a wedding in Layton. I don't remember the name of the place. It was a wedding facility. I don't recall the place, and it was we had more notice for that wedding, of course. But he and his groomsmen all wore shorts instead of. They were like tuxes, but they were cut off at the knees. And I think Brady, and who is Susan's son, and who is the flower girl? I don't remember. Memory's bad. Sorry. But it was a really nice wedding. Yeah. So that's up through their marriage life, or to their weddings, I should say. It's up to their weddings. Okay, when Kyle and I were first married, this was even before we had bought our house and moved to Roy. This was in like the second place we lived in, second apartment. So we had been married not even a year. Okay. The missionaries came. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint missionaries came to our door, and it was a man and his wife, and we invited them in, and they gave me the missionary lessons, and they used flannel boards as a prop. Do you know what a flannel board is? You're shaking your head, yes, okay. They used flannel boards as props to present the information, okay? And I was 20 at the time. I was 20 when I got married, and so we said thank you very much, and left. And for those of you who don't know, Kyle was born and raised in the church. His grandfather was a bishop for many, many, many years. This was before they limited the number of years they could or would be bishop. So he was brought up in the church, but after he went in the army and got away from it, he just kind of never went back. Of course, he was still young. So anyway, we went along through our life, and went to church functions, like I said, Pinewood Derby, scout events, and anything important. Well, anyway, when the kids were born, Kyle wanted the babies to be blessed in the LDS church, and so I didn't have any affiliation with any church at that time. I'd cut ties with mine. So I said, okay, that's fine. So we had each baby blessed in the church. Of course, Kyle wasn't able to do it, but we still did it. And then when they turned 8, guess what? We had them all baptized in the church. So they were all baptized at the age of 8. I don't remember exactly the age the children were, but they used to hold primary on a weekday after school. And I know I would pick them up and take them to the church and drop them off. And so they got to go to primary. And when they were old enough, don't ask me the age again because I can't recall, I dropped them at the church for sacrament meeting on Sundays. we did this until they were able to go alone by themselves. But we still went to the special event things. My husband and I, we still went to the special event things. And the missionaries, let's say we're now in my home in Roy, because we've had all these children, and, well, only 3. But every now and again, the missionaries would knock on the door, and we'd open the door, and I'd say, no thanks, I've had the lessons, which I had back when I was 20. I'm probably 30 now or something, And then another one would come at another time, of course, knock on the door. No, we've had the lessons. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And this went on till a long time. And after your dad died, I don't remember how many years. Let me think. Let's just say several years. I can't remember how many years exactly. Missionaries knocked at the door again. This time, with them was a man named Anderson. And I knew him from the church, from the activities we had, gone to and things like that. And we'd even had the home teachers in our, which they had back then, into our home, various times. So that was fine. I knew who he was, and it wasn't like I was letting a stranger into my house. And one of the elders' name was Elder Pratt, which I think was related to way back to the Pratts. Yeah. And so I took the lessons from him and his companion. I think his companion changed once or twice, but Elder Pratt was still there. So, okay, that was good. But this time, they got me to read the Book of Mormon. And when the lessons were over, I still hadn't finished the Book of Mormon, and I still was not sure what was going to happen. So they says, well, let's give you a couple more lessons. So they gave me more than what the set amount was at the time. And I still didn't do anything. But I kept reading the Book of Mormon, and I'm a slow reader, by the way, even though I love to read. I'm always at the library. Every once in a while, Elder Pratt would come by and say, how you doing? He didn't just desert me, so to speak. Of course, he eventually transferred. They always do. And then I decided to get baptized. So I had to call my 3 kids and tell them, which I did. And Kevin said, well, I would love to baptize you, but I can't do it for a few more months. He says, you don't have to wait, but you can if you want to. So I decided to wait. And so Kevin baptized me. There were exactly, I think, 14 people, counting myself, at the baptism. There was the Andersons, who came with the missionaries, he and his wife, and there was the bishop and his wife, and his 2 daughters, and Mark and Susan, and the 2 boys that they had at the time, and some friend of Mark's. I don't even know him, or I don't know if he's even around anymore, but some friend of Mark. Anyway, there turned to just be 14 of us, counting myself and Kevin. And it turned out really, really nice. Really, really nice. And years later, well, not years, couple years, I guess, is all. Well, of course, I went to the temple then after a couple years. And you know, Kevin went through as a proxy for his dad. And the children were sealed to me and Kyle, with the exception of Rick, because he was no longer going to church. Anyway, it took me a long time. I'm slow learning. I'm slow learning. But that was the best thing I've ever done.
Anything else you think of in life?
In life in general.
In general?
Well, it's just been really good, really fun, yeah. And of course, your mom planned my 80th birthday party, which was fantastic at Maddox, and all the family that was born, my family, was there, plus my sister, and but I will add that after both my husband and my sister's husband, my sister was only 2 years older than me, after they had both passed on, we did a lot of traveling together. So I've been to a lot of places. I've been to Europe a couple times, and Hawaii, and Mount Rushmore, and of course California, and Washington, D.C. and New York, and saw a lot of fabulous places. And of course, we always went to Colorado and visited, and sometimes to Nebraska to visit relatives. We couldn't leave them out entirely, but yeah, it's been a good life.
What advice do you have
For my family? Oh boy. I'm a poor one to give advice because I didn't do so well in many, many years. And I know it's not easy. Don't give up. Make the right choices. Love the Lord. And of course, your family.